Single mom couldn't pay school fees. Then Principal discovered the truth. Sarah Jenkins stood frozen in Principal Donovan's office, tears streaming down her face as he slid the envelope back across his desk. "I'm sorry, but we need the tuition payment by Friday or Emma can't continue attending Westlake Academy." The single mother's hands trembled as she reached for her purse, knowing it contained exactly $27.43, all she had left until payday. What Principal Donovan didn't know was that Sarah had been sleeping in her car for the past 2 weeks, giving up everything so her daughter could stay in the school that had become her only stability. But sometimes, when we're at our lowest point, life has a way of revealing unexpected heroes. If you're moved by stories of struggle, sacrifice and the kindness that can change lives, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more real-life inspirational stories that remind us of the good in humanity. The autumn wind whipped through the parking lot of Westlake Academy as Sarah Jenkins pulled her worn Honda into a space far from the other gleaming SUVs and luxury sedans. She checked her reflection in the rearview mirror, quickly wiping away any trace of tears and pinching color into her pale cheeks. Her daughter Emma couldn't see her like this, defeated, exhausted, broken. "Mom, I got an A on my science project." 10-year-old Emma bounded toward the car, her backpack bouncing against her navy blue Westlake uniform, her smile radiating pure joy. Sarah forced brightness into her voice. "That's amazing, sweetheart. I knew all those late nights would pay off." What she didn't say was how those late nights had been spent in the car, parked behind the 24-hour laundromat where the night attendant pretended not to notice them, where Sarah would help Emma with homework under the dome light until her daughter fell asleep in the reclined passenger seat. "Ms. Abernathy said it was the best in the class," Emma continued, buckling her seatbelt. "She said I might have a future as a marine biologist." Sarah's heart swelled with pride even as it ached. This was why she had sacrificed everything, their apartment, her pride, even meals for herself, to keep Emma at Westlake after losing her job at the marketing firm 3 months ago. The prestigious private school had become Emma's sanctuary after her father walked out 2 years earlier, leaving nothing but debts and broken promises. "That's wonderful, baby. I always said you were brilliant." Sarah pulled out of the parking lot, mentally calculating the miles left in her gas tank and whether she could stretch it until her first paycheck from her new job came through next week. The new position at the call center paid less than half of what she'd made before, but it was something. Something that wouldn't cover both rent and Emma's tuition, which was why they'd been evicted 2 weeks ago. Sarah had put their belongings in a small storage unit and told Emma they were staying with a friend temporarily while their apartment was being renovated. The lie tasted bitter on her tongue every time she repeated it. "Mom, can we go to the library? I need to research for my next project." "Of course," Sarah answered, relief washing over her. The library meant hours in a warm, safe place with free Wi-Fi where Emma could work and Sarah could continue her desperate online search for affordable housing. What Sarah didn't know was that her carefully constructed facade was about to crumble. Principal Robert Donovan prided himself on running Westlake Academy with both excellence and compassion. At 52, with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, he'd built the school's reputation on academic rigor balanced with character development. When his assistant Meredith placed Sarah Jenkins' file on his desk that morning, he sighed heavily. 3 months behind on tuition, Meredith noted. "The board is asking for action." Robert flipped through the file. "Emma Jenkins, she's one of our brightest 5th graders. Perfect attendance, exceptional grades. Her mother has been given multiple extensions," Meredith reminded him. "Policy states." "I know the policy," Robert interrupted gently. "Schedule a meeting with Ms. Jenkins for tomorrow morning." After Meredith left, Robert studied Emma's latest report card. Something didn't add up. The Jenkins family had never had payment issues before. Sarah Jenkins had always been involved in school activities, volunteering for events, attending every parent-teacher conference. What had changed? He made a few calls, discovering that Sarah had lost her position at Crawford Marketing during company-wide layoffs. A dedicated employee for 7 years, she'd been caught in corporate downsizing. Robert leaned back in his chair, thinking of his own struggles as a young teacher and single father after his wife's death. He remembered the community that had rallied around him and his daughter. Sometimes people just needed a bridge to get to the other side of hardship. He picked up the phone. The next morning, Sarah sat rigidly in a chair across from Principal Donovan, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to hide their trembling. She'd spent an hour in the school's bathroom before the meeting, washing up and changing into her one remaining professional outfit that she kept in the trunk for interviews. "Ms. Jenkins, thank you for coming in," Principal Donovan began, his voice gentler than she'd expected. "I understand there's an issue with Emma's tuition," Sarah said, struggling to keep her voice steady. "I've recently started a new position, and I'll be able to make a payment next week." Robert Donovan studied the woman before him. Despite her neat appearance, he noticed the dark circles under her eyes, the slight tremor in her hands, the way she seemed to be running on nothing but determination. "Ms. Jenkins, Sarah, I've known you and Emma for 3 years now. You've been an exemplary parent and an active member of our school community. I sense there's more happening than a temporary financial setback." Something in his kind tone cracked Sarah's carefully constructed wall. Tears welled in her eyes before she could stop them. "I'm handling it," she insisted, blinking rapidly. "Emma doesn't know, and I'd like to keep it that way. She loves this school. It's the only stability she has left." "Doesn't know what?" Robert asked quietly. Sarah stared at her hands, shame burning through her. "That we've been living in our car for the past 2 weeks. That I lost our apartment. That I can't afford both rent and tuition." The words tumbled out in a whisper. "I start getting paid next week. I'll figure something out by then." Robert's heart sank. He'd suspected financial troubles, but not homelessness. Not this proud, capable woman reduced to sleeping in a car with her child. "Where is Emma now?" "In class. She thinks we're staying with a friend while our apartment is being renovated." Sarah wiped a tear away. "Please don't tell her. She's thriving here despite everything. Her teachers say she could qualify for scholarships to good colleges if she continues on this path." Robert made a decision in that moment that went beyond school policy. "Sarah, I'd like to offer you a proposition." That afternoon, Emma bounced out of school to find her mother waiting with an unusual smile, one that reached her eyes for the first time in months. "Guess what, Em? We're going on an adventure." Emma's eyes widened. "What kind of adventure?" "We're going to stay in a new place for a while. Principal Donovan has a friend who owns a small guest house that needs a caretaker. We get to live there rent-free in exchange for me maintaining the property." What Sarah didn't explain was that the friend was Principal Donovan himself, who owned a small rental property that had been sitting empty. Or that he had created a special scholarship fund for families experiencing temporary hardship, with Emma as its first recipient. Or that he had connected Sarah with the school's network of parents who owned businesses, one of whom needed a marketing manager with exactly her qualifications. Instead, she watched her daughter's face light up with excitement as they drove to their new temporary home, a modest but clean one-bedroom cottage behind a larger house in a quiet neighborhood just 10 minutes from the school. "It's like a fairy tale house," Emma exclaimed as they pulled into the driveway of the little white cottage with blue shutters and a small front porch. For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt hope unfurling in her chest. "It kind of is, isn't it?" Principal Donovan hadn't told Sarah everything either. He hadn't mentioned that he'd been raised by a single mother who had sacrificed everything for his education. He hadn't shared how he'd watched his mother work 3 jobs to keep him in good schools, or how a kind administrator had once created a scholarship for him that he later learned had come from the administrator's own pocket. Some debts could only be repaid forward. The next morning, Robert watched from his office window as Sarah dropped Emma off at school. Both were smiling, walking with lighter steps than the day before. He thought about the emergency meeting he'd called with the school board, about how he'd challenged them to create a formal emergency scholarship fund for families in crisis. "We pride ourselves on teaching values," he had told them. "What better way to demonstrate those values than by ensuring no child loses their education due to a family's temporary hardship?" To his surprise, the board had unanimously approved, with several members making personal donations to launch the fund. 3 months later, Sarah stood nervously at the podium during Westlake's winter assembly. Principal Donovan had asked her to speak about the new Westlake Family Bridge program, which had already helped 3 families remain at the school during financial emergencies. "When I lost my job last fall, I thought I had to choose between a home for my daughter and her education," Sarah began, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "I was too ashamed to ask for help, too proud to admit I was drowning. I thought my worth as a parent was measured by how well I could handle everything alone." She paused, looking out at the sea of faces: parents, teachers, students. "What I've learned is that none of us succeeds entirely on our own. Behind every achievement is a community of support, whether visible or invisible. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is allow others to help us bridge the gap between where we are and where we need to be." In the audience, Emma beamed with pride. She knew the truth now, not the sanitized version Sarah had initially shared, but the real story of their weeks in the car, of her mother's sacrifice, of Principal Donovan's intervention. Rather than being embarrassed, Emma had been inspired, starting a student committee to support the Bridge program through fundraisers and awareness campaigns. Sarah continued, "Today, I'm proud to announce that I've accepted a permanent position as Westlake's new Community Outreach Coordinator, where I'll help other families access resources during difficult transitions." The applause was thunderous, led by Principal Donovan, who knew that Sarah's marketing background and personal experience made her uniquely qualified to expand the program he'd created because of her. 1 year later, Sarah and Emma stood in the doorway of their new apartment, a modest 2-bedroom they could now afford with Sarah's full-time position at the school. Emma, now in 6th grade and flourishing, had just been accepted into Westlake's Advanced Science program. "Mom," Emma said as they carried in the last box, "do you think we could volunteer at the shelter this weekend? I want to help other kids who might be going through what we did." Sarah pulled her daughter into a tight hug, marveling at the compassionate young woman she was becoming. "I think that's a wonderful idea." That evening, Sarah received an email from Principal Donovan with news that the Westlake Family Bridge program was being adopted by 5 other private schools in the state. Attached was a photo from the board meeting where they'd approved the expansion, the same board that had once been ready to dismiss Emma for unpaid tuition. Sarah thought about the chain of events that had led them here, how her greatest shame had become her greatest purpose, how Principal Donovan had seen not just their need but their potential, how Emma had transformed their hardship into compassion for others. Sometimes, she reflected, our darkest moments lead us to our brightest futures, but only if we're brave enough to let others see our truth. Principal Robert Donovan stood at his office window, watching families arrive for the new school year. Among them was Sarah Jenkins, now confidently walking beside Emma, both of them stopping to welcome a nervous-looking mother and daughter, the newest recipients of the Bridge Program scholarship. Robert smiled, remembering his own mother and the sacrifices she'd made. "We did it, Mom," he whispered. "We completed the circle." He thought about how close Sarah and Emma had come to slipping through the cracks, how many others might be suffering in silence behind brave faces. It had taken one moment of truth, one conversation of genuine vulnerability, to change not just their lives but the culture of an entire institution. The truth, he reflected, was always the beginning of healing, for individuals, for families, for communities. And sometimes, the most important truth was simply admitting that we all need help sometimes. As he watched Sarah embrace the new family, Robert knew that the real education at Westlake happened not just in classrooms but in these moments of human connection, where compassion became action and where no one had to face life's challenges alone. The bell rang, signaling the start of a new day, a new year, and for many families like the Jenkins, a new beginning built on truth, compassion, and the courage to accept help when it's needed most.